Today I'll talk about a bunch of works in machine learning and signal processing, which use matrix decompositions. And I'll describe some applications for these various matrix decompositions and algorithms for it. Okay. Uh, Please feel free to stop me at any point if you have any questions, and we can take questions as we go along through the talk. Okay, so the context of this talk is that uh, there is a lot of data which is often represented in the form of matrices, and examples of so example domains include like online search, social media, health records, and so on. And the main goal is, given the large amounts of data, we would like to extract useful information from this data. And because the data is often noisy and the data is also very large, we would like to design algorithms that can extract useful information from this data. And just to give more concrete examples of situations where data could be represented as matrices. So on the left, we have these matrix of gene expression levels. So each column corresponds to a particular patient. So I'm talking about like this figure here. So this entire thing is one matrix. Okay, it's divided into two blocks. So each column corresponds to a patient, and each row corresponds to a gene. Okay, and the color represents the gene expression level in that patient. So if it's red, if it's high, and if it's like blue, it's very low. And so the patients have been ordered into two groups. So one group of patients who have a particular type of leukemia called ALL, and the other group of patients who have another kind of leukemia called AML. So if we arrange the matrix in the right way, meaning like once we reorganize the rows in this format, we see that most of the patients who are suffering from ALL have high expression levels of these genes and low expression levels for these genes, right? And if you look at this patient suffering from AML, they have low expression levels of these genes and then high expression levels of some other genes. So when the data is given to you, you have no idea like which genes correspond to which disease, right? You just have a bunch of patients, and then these are in some arbitrary order. And if you are able to reorganize these rows, for example, in a way such that the high expression levels are correlated with like patients with ALL, and the high expression level here are correlated with patients for AML, then you can at least get some correlation between which kind of disease is connected to which kind of genes, right? So this is one example of how data could be represented as matrices and what kind of operations you may have to do in order to extract information from this data, right? The second example here is user item ratings, which is very common in e-commerce platforms like Flipkart or Amazon or Netflix and so on, where each row here corresponds to a user and each column here corresponds to an item. And if a user has either bought or reviewed an item, it's represented in blue, and then the score kind of represents whether the user liked it, and if so, how much they liked it based on review or the score that they have given and so on, right? And the predominant objective of these e-commerce platforms is based on the information that they have, which is the sales that they have done. They would like to understand, for this user, are there any other items that the user might be interested in, and if I can find out those items, then I could perhaps recommend and get the user to buy them, right? So this problem is called matrix completion, and we'll return to it in more detail a little later. So the problem here is that we have observed some entries of the matrix, and so here the entries in blue, and then based on this, we want to predict what the entries that we have not observed, the ones where we have these zeros, right? We would like to predict the entries that we have not seen. Okay. The third example, which again we will come to a little later in the talk, is the setting where you represent video as a sequence of frames. So each column here corresponds to a particular time instant, right? And a video is just nothing but a sequence of frames. A frame is just an image. So you keep playing images, like changing images very rapidly, and then you see a video, right? So at t equal to 0, you have this image, and then at t equal to say 10 microseconds, or depending on the refresh rate, you have like you see this image and so on. So This whole matrix captures a video, and each column corresponds to a vectorized version of a frame or an image. Okay, so image we usually think of as two-dimensional. We're just making it, stacking it as a vector, and then we are just putting it here, right? And this each column corresponds to a time instant. Okay? And in this video, one of the problems that we'll look at later is, given a video which is represented in the matrix of this form, you want to separate the background from foreground. Especially in surveillance kind of situations, you want to basically focus on the foreground and changes in the foreground to figure out like if a person has entered the location or not. So you would like a first step would be to, given a video, to be able to separate background from foreground, right? And we'll also come to this problem a little later in the talk, and how matrix decomposition algorithms can help in performing background foreground separation of videos. Okay. So the main tool that we'll be using in extracting information from matrices of this sort is matrix decomposition. And like there are two classical kind of decompositions that we can think of. The first one is actually much more classical. So you would want to write a matrix as a product of two different matrices, U, V transpose, where you may want to impose some constraint on both the matrices U and V. So U is in some set S1. S1 gives you some kind of structure for how U can be, and similarly V is in S2, right? Another way, another kind of decomposition one may think of is M should be written as U plus V, where U again has some structure and V has some other structure, right? It turns out that in many situations, and I'll give explicit examples of like what are the sets S1 and S2 here or in these situations that we would like to take, which helps us extract information from these matrices, suppress the noise in these situations, and so on. Okay. Classically, there are several matrix decomposition approaches, including like eigen decomposition, Schur decomposition, Cholesky decomposition, QR, Jordan, and so on. So these are like extremely elegant and have been very, very heavily used in several applications, right? But the kind of decomposition that we'll be looking at are related to, especially related to singular value decomposition. But at the same time, they have some differences, and there are also more general versions of these decompositions. The main difference, I would say, is that these classical decompositions have been mostly designed for better understanding the structure of the matrix, and also to aid with computation, for example, like matrix multiplication or solving systems of linear equations. So for those situations, these decompositions have been designed and have been used classically in several such algorithms. But the goal of the decompositions that we are interested in this context is more about trying to extract information from matrices. So we'll be imposing different kinds of, we'll be trying to perform different kinds of decomposition, and not necessarily the classical decompositions which have been like very heavily studied in literature. Okay. So let me give you a couple of examples. So the first example of decomposition that's widely used in machine learning is principal component analysis, where you are given a bunch of data points and you want to project all of them into a much smaller dimensional subspace so that you reduce the dimension of the data points. But at the same time, you should not lose a lot of, like you should preserve the most important information in the data. Okay. So this can be phrased as follows. So you have a data matrix M, where each column corresponds to a data point. You want to factorize it as UV transpose, where U is a tall matrix and V transpose is a fat matrix. Okay. What this means is that each column here, which is a data point, can actually be written as a linear combination of very few columns in U, right? So you can think of the first column of V transpose as the projection of this first data point M on the subspace spanned by U, right? So the way you would try to find this decomposition is you want to minimize over U and V of the appropriate dimensions here, the Frobenius square of M minus UV transpose. So M is the given matrix which we know, and we optimize over both U and V the Frobenius square of this difference. There's of course a scaling factor, so you could multiply U by lambda and V transpose by 1 over lambda, and the function value will not change. So up to this scaling, this is actually actually you can put a rotation matrix. So U times R and then R transpose V transpose, where R transpose is identity. So that will not change the function value. So up to this rotation matrix, the solution to this problem is indeed unique and given by the singular value decomposition of the matrix M. Okay. So this is the first example of the kind of decomposition that we'll be interested in the machine learning situation. The second example is k-means clustering, where we are given a bunch of data points. So we are just given all these black dots, right? And we would like to cluster them, meaning that we want to group data points together so that these data points are close within the cluster and are farther away between clusters. So here, when we cluster the data, we may color them with different colors. So different colors represent different clusters, right? And the cluster information is useful, especially in separating the data coming from, say, multiple sources. So if all of this data is coming from a mixture of sources and we actually don't know which data point has come from which mixture, we would like to, we would still like to be able to separate the data points based on their source. And k-means clustering is a very, very popular method for doing this. And the way it does this is that you again want to minimize M minus UV transpose over U and V, where U is again the number of columns in U is much smaller than the number of columns in M. But the second constraint here, as opposed to the PCA setting, is that each column of V transpose is an indicator vector. Okay, so it has an indicator vector on only one element. Okay, which means that you are like you take any column M of M. So let's say the first column. Then the first column of V transpose only has a single one in one entry and zeros everywhere. So whichever it puts a one, you are basically looking at that column in U. So you're assigning the first data point in M to that particular cluster center in U, and then you are minimizing the Frobenius square of the reconstruction error. Okay. So this is k-means clustering, and this again is a matrix decomposition problem where U and V transpose are of lower dimension, and at the same time V transpose has this additional constraint that each column only has a single one and all the other entries are equal to 0. Okay. Any question till this point about the motivation for why we are looking at matrix decomposition? Okay. Yeah.
There may be several, products, UV transpose. Which one will you choose as a better one?
So usually when you write this as an optimization problem, you will choose whichever gives you the best function value, objective value. And if there are multiple points that give you the objective value, you usually cannot distinguish them. And the other thing is, in general, if the data indeed has this kind of separable structure where it indeed separates into clusters, there is often only a unique solution. If you actually find two solutions which are actually very similar to each other in terms of function value, but are actually very different in terms of their structure, the possibility is that either the K you have chosen is not correct, whatever decomposition you have gotten is probably not the right thing for the problem at hand. So you should change something. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any specific reason for taking the Frobenius norm? Can we, just take L1 norm or something like that?
Yeah, you can do different things. So the good thing about Frobenius square is that the loss. So this is in general called loss in like machine learning language. So this can be written as sum over all the entries square, right? And optimization can be done much faster for objectives of that sort. The second reason you can think of is if the data is indeed coming from a mixture of Gaussians. So each data point M is actually coming from, let's say you have two isotropic Gaussians, right? But the means are different. So one has mu1 as mean and the other one has mu2 as mean. Then this is indeed the maximum likelihood estimator. So from a probabilistic point of view, this is the MLE estimate, maximum likelihood estimator for mixture of Gaussians. Yeah, maybe those are two reasons why Frobenius square is somehow special. Yeah.
Okay.
People have maybe tried other things, but like in practice, again, you have to come up with good optimization algorithms. For Frobenius square, we know good optimization algorithms. So, okay. Okay, so in a nutshell, like there are many more, there are several applications for matrix factorization. And some of the things that we look at in particular is matrix completion, but there are also other applications such as non-negative principal component analysis, sparse coding, subspace clustering, and so on. And there are several approaches for solving these matrix decomposition problems, especially like classical methods. The classical methods are usually algebraic, for example, like Gaussian elimination. And there are also optimization based approaches, which are again based on convex optimization, because convex optimization is a very we know that convex optimization can be solved in polynomial time, and there are very nice and efficient algorithms for convex optimization, right? But unfortunately, for several of the problems that we'll see going forward, it turns out that these classical methods, which are algebraic or based on convex relaxations, are not very well suited, because while they are very effective on small data instances, they don't scale very well when the data, the matrix size is very large. Okay, and the second issue, especially with the algebraic methods, is that these algebraic methods only work when there is no noise, right? When there is some amount of noise, the algebraic methods are often not very noise tolerant, because they're based on solving equations exactly and so on. So the approach that we'll be talking about, and which has had a lot of practical usage, is this meta-level algorithm called alternating minimization. And the algorithm is as follows. So we first write this matrix decomposition as this minimization of some function f, right, which depends on the data matrix M, and then you have these free parameters u and v, where you want u to be in S1 and v to be in S2, and then you want to minimize over u and v of this function, right? And we can recall that both PCA and the k-means clustering problem, we wrote both of them in this form, where f was appropriate, like the Frobenius norm square of M minus UA transpose, and S1 and S2 were dependent on like the problem that you were solving, right? And the alternating minimization approach for solving this is the following. So we first fix a random b, okay? And then we just optimize this, minimize this over u, okay? And then we fix that minimizer u, and then go back and optimize over v, okay? And then we can just keep repeating these two steps. Okay? So is the algorithm clear? So we first choose a random b, just minimize over u, and then we fix u, and then randomize over v. So the reason this is very highly used in practice is that each of these, so if you fix one of the variables, optimizing the other variable often turns out to be very easy. In particular, in most of the situations we look at, it will be just a least squares solving problem. And for least square solving, there are very efficient, highly scalable algorithms from convex optimization. Okay. Yeah, so this is empirically widely used, and for the clustering problem, this algorithm is called Lloyd's algorithm, and is very classical, going back maybe about like 100 years or so. And yeah, so empirically this is used in several situations and has been observed to have very good performance. However, theoretically, not much has been done until like the last 10 or 15 years. And in the next in the rest of this talk, we'll talk about the analysis of alternating minimization and the kind of guarantees you can get for 3 different problems of matrix decomposition. Okay. So is everything clear till this point? Like the algorithm is clear? Any questions about the algorithm? Okay, so let's move. Okay, so in this talk, we will look at understanding the performance of alternating minimization for 3 problems of interest. So the first one is matrix completion, the second one is robust PCA, and the third one is sparse coding, and then we'll conclude the talk. Okay. So let's first start with matrix completion. Okay. So the matrix completion problem is the following, especially arising in like e-commerce or online movie distributing platforms like Netflix and so on. So each row corresponds to a user, and each column corresponds to either an item or a movie. And the dark blue ones are the ratings given by users who have watched those movies, right? The dark blue ones are the ratings that this user has given to this movie, this one to this movie, and this one to this movie, right? And based on the information that we have here, you would like to predict, for say for this user or this user, among the movies that the user has not seen, which movies might the user like, right? And the reason for that is that once we know what the movies the user may like, we will be able to suggest them to them, and thereby give a good recommendation, right? So in general, if you don't have any assumptions about this ratings matrix, there is no way you can do anything, because the unobserved entry could be arbitrary, right? But a very reasonable assumption to make on this kind of matrix is that the decision on whether a user likes a particular movie or not depends on like very few preferences for the user and very few movie features. So you can think of the user preferences as maybe the genre of the movie. So for example, yeah. So depending on the age group of the user, depending on the language of the user, depending on the location of the user, and similarly, movie features may be what's the genre of the movie and what's the time period that the movie was released in, and things like that, right? So the assumption here is that this matrix is essentially low rank, where the low rank corresponds to the user preferences or movie features, which essentially determine whether or not a user likes a movie. Okay? So we are assuming that this matrix is indeed low rank, and we are only observing a few entries, and based only on these entries, you would like to recover all the unobserved entries. So this is the problem. So just some notation. So the matrix size here is n cross m, users cross movies, and without loss of generality, we assume that n is greater than or equal to m. Otherwise, you can just take the transpose of the matrix, right? And the rank of the matrix is denoted by R, and it's much smaller than either n or m. And for the purposes of this talk, we can just think of R as constant, but the results don't really make this assumption, but for clarity of understanding the results, we can just assume that R is a constant. Okay. And as I mentioned, the goal is to infer the entire matrix just based on seeing like this few number of observations. Okay. That's the problem. Okay. So how does alternative minimization solve this problem? So it again writes this optimization problem where you want to minimize over U and V of the appropriate dimension, right? So here U will be an n cross R matrix, and V transpose will be an R cross M matrix. Okay, so the product will be an n cross M matrix. So you want to minimize over U and V of the appropriate dimension, summation ij in the observed entries. Mij is the observed rating minus the inner product of Ui Vj. This is the ijth entry of UV transpose, right? So you are minimizing the Frobenius square only on the observed entries of the difference between M, the rating matrix, and the factorization you are constructing. Okay. Now, how does the alternative minimization algorithm proceed? So it first fixes this V transpose, the movie features, right? And then it only optimizes over U. And here you can actually notice that once you fix these, this optimization problem decouples into several different optimization problems, one for each row of U. Okay, so you look at all the entries in the ith row that you have observed, right? All of them together give you an optimization problem determining the values here, right? And then this is decoupled from the optimization problem you have for the second row and so on. So this basically decouples into multiple least squares problem, which we can solve either exactly or using iterative algorithms again. Okay. In the next iteration, we fix again the user preferences U and then solve for the minimize over the V matrix. So this again decouples into multiple least squares problems. Okay. This is algorithm, and ideally what we would like to say is that if we start with some UV, with some V, and then perform this algorithm, the resulting, and then we assume that the underlying matrix M is indeed low rank, then after observing some number of entries, if we implement this algorithm, then the UV transpose will indeed converge to the true matrix M, right? But it turns out that it's not always possible, and we need some regularity assumptions. Let me try to explain why we need an additional assumption in addition to the low rank assumption on the matrix. So let's say we observe all entries as zeros here, right? And then we are asked to predict this entry. And let's say we are told that the matrix is rank 1, right? So it's very much possible that this entry is either 1 or 2, or it could be any number. And this entire matrix will still be low rank by filling in zeros everywhere and only changing this entry, right? The reason why prediction is hard here is that this user and this item are very unique, right? However, like in order for us to be able to predict what this user may like, there should be some kind of similarity between various users, right? Then we can look at the similarity between users and whether this movie was watched by those other users, and then based on that we'll be able to predict whether this user might like this movie or not. So to be more concrete, we'll quantify this uniqueness of a user in terms of a quantity called incoherence of the matrix. So if the matrix M has this singular value decomposition U sigma V transpose, right? Let's say this is a singular value decomposition where U are the left singular vectors and V are the right singular vectors. Then we look at a particular row of the U matrix, and as long as the row has norm which is less than or equal to mu square root R over N, and then mu is called the incoherence parameter. Okay. So firstly note that because this is singular value decomposition, each column here is unit norm, right? So the entire Frobenius norm of this matrix is square root R, right? Now what this is saying is, because there are n different rows, if the Frobenius norm was equally divided among all the rows, then each of them will have square root of R over N as the L2 norm of that particular row, right? And this mu is measuring how much larger is it compared to square root of R over N. Okay. And this is always satisfied for some mu between 1 and square root of N over R, because if you put square root N over R, then this bound will just be equal to 1. And because this is a unitary matrix, this is a orthonormal basis, any row can have norm at most 1, right? So the norm of any row is indeed less than or equal to 1. So this is definitely satisfied for mu is equal to square root of N over R. But ideally, we'll be able to get very good results only when mu is much smaller than square root of N over R. So let me explain this a bit more in terms of pictures. So if the singular vectors, so if the matrix that we have is this, right? Ones in this block, zeros in here, zeros here, and ones here. It means that there are two different groups of users, and these users are kind of very similar to each other, but very different from this group, and this group of users are very similar to each other, right? And in this case, the singular vectors turn out to be square root of 2 over N times all ones 0 and all zeros 1 here, right? And in this case, it turns out, because rank is equal to 2, this is square root of R over N times any row has norm 1, right? So in this case, the incoherence parameter is equal to 1, and this is a very, very incoherent matrix, right? On the other hand, if you have like a group of users who are only n over 4 in size, right? In this case, you can again write down the singular vectors, and they turn out to be square root of R over N times square root 2 in this for these first two users, right? So in this case, the incoherence parameter mu is square root 2. This is still a constant, but a little less than earlier, where we had the incoherence parameter to be equal to 1. Okay, and finally, if there is only a single user who is very unique compared to all the remaining users, right? Then the incoherence parameter here, so the singular vectors turn out to be this and this, right? And the incoherence parameter here turns out to be square root of N over 2, which can be very large when N is large, right? So this is not at all incoherent. So to summarize, we'll look at this incoherence condition, and then there will be a parameter mu for which this incoherence condition will be satisfied. and will be able to get good results when mu is relatively small. Okay, so the regularity assumptions are as follows. So first we have a low rank matrix. So the given matrix M has rank R, and it also has an incoherence parameter mu. And then we observe some D entries uniformly at random from among all the entries. So we have a square, we have like this matrix M, and we observe D entries where D could be much smaller than M times N, which is the total number of entries in the matrix. And the goal is that we are, based on these D entries, we want to reconstruct all the entries of the matrix. Okay. So the main result is that once D is greater than a polynomial depending on like the incoherence parameter, kappa is the condition number, which is the ratio of the largest to smallest singular value of the matrix, times R, which is rank, times n log n, n is the larger dimension. Then alternating minimization recovers the full matrix. Okay. So the most important part here is that this D here, okay, so in situations where let's say mu, kappa and R are all constants, right? Then we are saying D only needs to be about n log n, whereas the total number of entries in the matrix is m times n. So you're only observing an n log n, like a very small fraction of the matrix, and just using this you are able to recover the entire matrix. So are there any questions on the result? Okay, so let me move forward. Right. So this basically says that alternating minimization recovers once the number of samples is like for constant parameters here. It only has to be like slightly larger than linear in the dimension, and then you can recover like the entire matrix. Okay. The main advantage of alternating minimization over other methods which can again recover this full matrix with the same kind of guarantees is that the runtime of alternating minimization is again essentially linear in the dimension whenever the condition number and rank are reasonably small. On the other hand, there are convex relaxation approaches which require order n cube number of steps in order to get to in order to recover the full matrix from these observations, right? So n log n scales much better for large n compared to n cube, and this is the reason that alternative minimization is much more popular than the convex relaxation approaches.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So does these results also hold if we choose online settings, like when matrix is changing incrementally, let's say?
No. So there are some results on online matrix completion, but in general, I don't think there are very strong results for online setting. This result is only for the statistical setting where there is a fixed matrix and then you are observing entries from the same matrix. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, are there special cases where the complexity is less? Hello?
Yeah, so people have not studied special cases further than this. Yeah, these are the standard. This is the standard setting. I don't think like people have studied. People have studied other settings, but not necessarily special cases where it's faster. So people have studied, for example, if your samples are not coming uniformly from the entire matrix, but maybe larger entries are revealed with higher probability and so on. So there are other models of sampling that people have studied, but not like special cases where you get better results.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah.
So the algorithm is just repeating those steps for poly kappa r times n log n many iterations and returning the u and v that you have.
Yeah. So you only need to run them for poly of kappa r number of iterations, and in each iteration you are using like n log n samples. Yeah.
Okay, and then you show that you exactly converts to the matrix with high probability or something? Or what do you show?
Yeah. So in order to get epsilon accuracy, you need to run this algorithm for poly of kappa r log 1 or epsilon number of iterations.
Okay, so there is a dependence on epsilon as well on the front end.
Yeah.
Okay.
So whenever you have iterative algorithms, you'll have a dependence on epsilon. So it will be log 1 or epsilon here.
Okay, thank you.
Right. So like these were the initial results obtained in about like 2012, 2013, and then there have been several improvements on these initial results. So the first one was by Moritz Hart and Wouters in 2014, where sorry, I was missing my pointer. So these results basically, so the initial results, you had to use different samples in different iterations. So we said there are log 1 or epsilon iterations, and we had to use like different samples in different iterations. And this one again uses like different samples in different iterations, but the dependence, polynomial dependence on the condition number was improved to a logarithmic dependence on the condition number. Right? And then there were later results which removed this resample. So there is also a log 1 or epsilon here, because in each iteration you are using independent samples. And then there was another, there were subsequent works which even removed the logarithmic dependence on 1 or epsilon. And the best result seems to be a poly of R times n log cube n without any dependence on the condition number, and also no dependence on the desired accuracy. So this is in terms of sample complexity, but the number of iterations will still have a log 1 or epsilon. So, but you can use the same number of same samples. So,
can you say once more what condition number is?
Condition number. So you have the singular value decomposition of the matrix, right?
Yes.
So yeah. So you have this m equal to u sigma v transpose, right? And the largest singular value divided by the smallest singular value, which is a quantity which is greater than 1. That's the condition number.
Okay, thank you.
Also, it seems that there is no more any dependence on incovariance parameter in your results. Is that true?
So no. So I think like here I mentioned this mu here.
Yeah.
So there is a poly of mu. Actually, in all of these results, there is a poly of mu. I have not written it explicitly. Yeah, all of these are poly of mu.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So let me give you a brief proof outline for the rank 1 case. So the high level argument is the following. So the alternating minimization algorithm on this objective, we can show basically is an approximate power method. And power method, I'll describe what power method is in the next slide more precisely. But if I give you a matrix, let's say we have a symmetric matrix, right? Power method is an algorithm which can give you the top eigenvector of the matrix. And if the underlying matrix is rank 1, right, it will give you exactly the like the top eigenvector of that matrix, which is, and from that you can indeed recover the matrix because the matrix was rank 1, right? And what we are saying here is that alternating minimization is essentially doing approximate power method. And the argument goes as follows. So if all entries are observed, right? So this objective is nothing but m minus uv transpose Frobenius square. And if you do alternating minimization on this, the update equations can be written explicitly in closed form. And so those are these equations. So ut plus 1 is just m times vt appropriately normalized, and vt plus 1 is m transpose times ut plus 1 appropriately normalized, and then vt plus 1 you again go here, right? So you can see that ut plus 1 will become m transpose m, m times m transpose times ut appropriately normalized, right? So every time you are hitting mm transpose to the vector that you currently have, and that's why this is called power method. And because these entries were sampled uniformly at random, you can show that alternating minimization on this objective is essentially performing an approximate stochastic version of this thing. So when only some entries are observed, when you are doing alternating minimization on this one, it turns out that you are stochastically doing this power method, and you can analyze because power method is very well known classically for computing the top eigenvector. You only have to like extend it when the operations are only being done in a stochastic manner. So let me describe what power method is. So you are given a matrix M, which is n cross M, and MM transpose is a positive semi-definite matrix, and let's say its eigenvalues are lambda1 greater than or equal to lambda2 and so on in descending order, right? And its eigenvectors are W1, W2. So our goal is to output a matrix U, output a vector U, such that U minus W1, the top eigenvector, is at most epsilon. And the most important parameter in our ability to do this is this eigengap, which is lambda1 minus lambda2 divided by lambda1. So lambda1 minus lambda2 is the gap between the top two eigenvalues, divided by lambda1 is the normalized gap, and you can think of it as the signal to noise ratio. So if delta is large, then we'll be able to find U very easy, find W1 very easily. If delta is very, very small, we'll not be able to find W1 very quickly. Okay. And the power method is the following algorithm. So you start with a random U0, and you keep doing the update UT plus 1 is MM transpose times UT. So you're always, so eventually UT plus 1 is MM transpose to the T plus 1 times U0, right? That's why this is called power method. And eventually you will output just the normalized version of the final vector you have. And it's a very classical result that you, like after doing this for 1 over delta log M over epsilon iterations, you'll get error epsilon. Okay. So delta here is this eigengap. M is the dimension of this should be n because MM transpose is an M cross N matrix. So yeah, so this should be n. So delta is the eigengap, n is the dimension, and epsilon is the desired accuracy. So power method basically computes the top eigen vector, and if the matrix M was low rank, you will indeed find the entire matrix because the matrix was just rank 1, right? And what we are saying here is that the alternating minimization approach algorithm here is approximately doing power method because of the stochastic kind of observation entries here, and the incoherence assumption plays a key role in being able to bound the error when you are doing this approximation. Okay. So this is all I wanted to say about the proof. If there are any questions, I can take the questions about matrix completion now. About the proof also. Yeah.
I have one question regarding one of the earlier results.
Yeah.
So predicting the entire matrix by observing D entries.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the distributed version of this problem, has it been studied or anything is known regarding that?
There are also works on distributed matrix completion, but I'm not very familiar with what exactly they optimize over. So in this setting, there is only sample complexity and runtime complexity, right? So those are the only two things. When you go to the distributed setting, you have to study about communication complexity. So depending on like what you prioritize, you may get different trade-offs, right?
Okay. Okay.
So,
thank you.
Actually, like even distributed PCA, let's say I'm giving you all the entries, right? And but the matrix entries are distributed across different machines. So some entries are in some machines, and some other entries are in some other machines, and you want to compute the top eigen directions of this matrix. So this also has been studied, but I think there are several open problems in this area.
Yeah, thank you.
As a follow-up on his question, can't we do something like, let's say we have optimized the Frobenius objective, and since the Frobenius norm segregates into several individual residuals, so doesn't it seem like a distributed problem in itself?
So the UV transpose, right? You somehow have to aggregate the updates from all the different machines, and
okay,
so,
I see.
You want to so that will lead to some communication. So you want to do something else. So for the distributed setting, some of the popular approaches include what is known as sketching. So sketching is a popular tool where for reducing the dimensions of the matrix, at least in theory. So you work with like much smaller matrices, which basically preserve the eigenstructure of the original matrix.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Question?
Yeah.
So it looks like you're assuming that you have access to D uniformly randomly chosen entries of the matrix.
Correct.
So is this assumption like justified from the perspective of your applications?
From the application point of view, I don't think this is justified. There are multiple challenges. So let me tell you. So this was the kind of first model that was proposed, which was like theoretically amenable, that you could actually do something about it. There have been other works where people assumed different kinds of sampling probabilities. One particular thing that I know of is the sampling probability of an element is proportional to its value, right? If a particular entry is large, presumably that person will probably go and like either buy or watch, right? So people have also studied in this setting, and even there we know of efficient algorithms, right? But in general, you actually think of this more as a dynamic problem than as a static problem. So, for example, you also have the ability to decide which items to recommend, maybe which elements will give you the best information about like the remaining parts of the matrix and so on, right? So in that generality, I don't think this has been studied very thoroughly.
Okay. So is it easy to argue that like in a completely adversarial setting, it's not doable or something? Like if the T entries are completely arbitrary?
Yeah, then I think you cannot do it. I'm not sure if there are results. There are definitely like computational hardness results on some variants of matrix completion, that it's NP hard and so on. Yeah, I'm not sure if adversarial is one of them, but I would think that if it's given adversarial, I don't think you can do much about it. Yeah. For example, like if I tell you only like the upper half or something, right? So we had some example here, right? Yeah. So in this case, for example, if I just give you like the left this block, then like I'm giving you like pretty much like 1/4 of the matrix, right? But you cannot say anything about this part.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So let me just briefly summarize. So alternating minimization can probably solve this low rank matrix completion problem. And the main idea for why this works is that it actually performs approximate power method. And this relation of alternating minimization to the approximate power method actually both improved our understanding of the alternating minimization algorithm and also inspired its use for several other problems. So in the next part, we'll talk about one such problem, which is the robust PCA problem. So the problem is as follows. So we are given a matrix M, which is actually a sum of a low rank matrix and a sparse matrix. Okay, and there are two applications where you can think of like why this might be the case. So one is that the data, so the data which is actually this, the true data, is coming from some low dimensional subspace, right? But then some of the entries are just arbitrarily corrupted, right? And the total number of corruptions is maybe bounded, or maybe they are just missing. Like some of the entries of like this one, like some of the entries are just missing, right? That again you can formulate it as subtracting those elements, and those elements are sparse, meaning that you're only missing like a few entries. So in that case, you want to, given this matrix, you want to decompose it into this sum of low rank and a sparse matrix. Another example turns out to be this foreground background separation, where each column in this matrix, as we said in the beginning of the talk, corresponds to a frame in a video, right? And so as time proceeds, you go from this frame to this frame to this frame to this frame and so on, right? So the low rank part corresponds to background. Like presumably background will just stay constant for a bunch of time periods and then change maybe a little bit. and then again stay constant, and so there will be very little change in terms of the background. Whereas the foreground, you would expect that foreground will occupy very few pixels in the. So if you look at each column, right, there will be very few pixels that the foreground will occupy. And similarly, if you look at in the time sequence, like if a particular pixel is always being occupied by foreground, it's probably part of the background, right? So the foreground is sparse both in the pixels and in time. Right? So if you are able to separate, if you are able to do this low rank plus sparse decomposition, then you will be given a video, will be able to do background and foreground separation. And we'll look at this example like towards the end of this section. So the alternating minimization algorithm again is the following. So you write the Frobenius square objective, and you want to minimize this Frobenius square objective over L and S, where rank of L is R, so L is low rank, and S is sparse, right? So this is the condition. And alternating minimization again first starts with say S equal to 0. And in this case, minimizing the Frobenius square of M minus L is just taking the top R principal components of M, right? And then once we have an L, we'll look at M minus L, and then since we want S to be sparse, we just threshold M minus L and retain only the largest elements. And once we update S, we again go back and do top principal components of M minus S, and we'll get an L, and then we put that L here and look at M minus L and threshold, and then we get an S, and we just keep repeating these things. So if you look at it, actually both of these are projection steps. So this is projection onto the set of low rank matrices, and this is projection onto the set of sparse vectors, right? This alternating projection approaches have been studied for convex sets, but the key challenge here is that both the low rank low rank set and also the sparse set are non-convex sets, and the key challenge here is to prove convergence of this approach for these non-convex projections. So is the algorithm clear? Okay. So again, like we need regularity assumptions in this setting. The reason is again that if I just give you a matrix which is say 1 here and then all zeros, you could either write it as the low rank matrix being this, and then the sparse matrix being all zeros, or you could make the low rank matrix all zeros and then have the sparse matrix. So the main issue here is that the low rank matrix is also sparse, and if you want identifiability of these components, you want to make sure that the low rank matrix is not sparse, right? This again basically boils down to incoherence. So for example, if the PCA directions are like all ones, then it's very incoherent. But if the PCA direction is somewhat sparse, it only has non-zeros in like half of the entries, then it's somewhat incoherent. And if it's very closely aligned with the standard basis vector, then it's not at all incoherent, right? So the incoherence parameter again we define as the mu, so that every row norm of the left singular vectors ui, the L2 norm, is at most mu square root of r over n. Okay, mu again is between 1 and square root of n over r, and our complexity will depend on mu. The smaller the mu, the better our results will be. Okay. The second condition is that the sparse matrix is degree bounded. What we mean by that is that we look at the underlying true sparse corruption matrix S star, and it has at most d non-zero elements in any row or any column. Okay, so are the two assumptions clear? So we are we're assuming that the underlying matrix M is L star plus S star, where L star is rank R and mu incoherent, and S star is degree bounded with only d non-zero elements either in any row and any column. So these are the assumptions. So the guarantee for alternating minimization is that L star and S star is recorded by the alternating minimization algorithm whenever the number of the sparsity of the sparse matrix is at most n over some constant times mu square r. Okay. So firstly, if d is equal to 0, then we actually don't have to do anything, right? We can just so whatever we have is already a low rank matrix. We can just written that plus S star, which is 0 matrix. And here we are saying the number of non-zeros in any row or any column can be almost n over mu square r. So if mu is a constant and r is a constant, we are saying we can have a constant fraction of the entries of the matrix being corrupted, and we can still recover the underlying matrix. Okay. And this bound turns out to be information theoretically optimal up to constant factors, meaning that if d is greater than some other constant times n over mu square r, then there exist matrices for which you cannot uniquely decompose it as L star plus S star. Okay. There will be multiple, and it will not even be identifiable. Okay. That's what we mean by information theoretically optimal. And the runtime of this algorithm turns out to be r square n square log 1 over epsilon, where r is the underlying rank, n is the dimension, and epsilon is the desired accuracy. Okay. If you actually look at the complexity, runtime complexity of doing regular PCA without the robust part, then the runtime is r n square log 1 over epsilon using power method. So this is only a factor of r more expensive than even regular PCA. Okay. So in terms of the achievability guarantee, there was even the convex relaxation approaches can indeed achieve d less than or equal to some constant times n over mu square r, but the runtime of these approaches is something like n cube over epsilon square, and this guarantee is much better both in terms of n and in terms of epsilon. Okay. So the reason for why alternating minimization is much better is its improved runtime, at the same time maintaining the same kind of performance guarantees. So is there any question about the result before I go on to like the proof outline? Okay. Okay, so the key technical result turns out to be a statement about low rank projections, right? So let's say we are looking at the first time step, right? So we are saying the low rank matrix L, we are our iterate will be the rank R projection of the matrix M, which is L star plus S star. Okay, and we want to argue that L is very close to L star. And in particular, what we would like to show is that L and L star are close in a entry-wise sense. Okay? So the infinity norm means that every entry of L is close to every the corresponding entry of L star by this 1 over 10 maximum entry of S star. Okay? If you apply standard matrix perturbation inequalities like Davis-Kahan, all you will be able to show is that the operator norm of L minus S star is at most the operator norm of S star. But it turns out like this is not at all sufficient, both because like this is in terms of like the L2 norm, and also because you have a constant 1 here, whereas you have a constant which is strictly less than 1 here, right? The reason for however, like this inequality in general is known to be tight, and the main reason for why we can get something stronger is by using incoherence of L star and also the sparsity of S star. Okay. So let's go through like the brief proof outline of how we do this. So let's say L star is rank 1, right? So L star is just U star transpose, and let's say L is because it's a low rank projection, it's again a rank 1 matrix, right? So L is, let's say, UU transpose. So because U is an is eigenvector of M, right? We see that M times U will again be equal to U, and let's again say like the eigenvalue here is again 1 because the eigenvalue is 1 here. In general, it will not be exactly equal to 1, but close to 1. But let's say it's equal to 1 for like the sake of simplicity here. So L star plus S star times U is indeed equal to U, right? Because U is an eigenvector of M. Now rearranging, we see that U is indeed equal to I minus S star inverse times L star U, right? Now L star U can actually be written as the inner product between U star and U times U star, right? And I minus S star inverse, if we do the Taylor expansion, we can write it as okay. So S star is actually a sparse matrix. We can show that its operator norm is less than 1, and So you can indeed do this power series, and then you get I plus S star square and so on. And you'll be multiplying with a constant, which is the inner product of U and U star, and then you'll be multiplying this vector U star. So the good part is on the right hand side, U is only captured in the scalar quantity, and this whole thing will again be an incoherent vector, which is very similar to U star, because the first term is U star, right? So first term is U star, and once you take this on the opposite side, like on the other side, you will get U minus U star is S star plus S star square plus so on times U star. And you can use the sparsity of S star and the operator norm of and the incoherence of U star to argue that the infinity norm of U minus U star is at most G times the infinity norm of S star times the infinity norm of U star. Okay. This basically gives you an infinity norm bound on the eigenvectors. You can then convert this into the infinity norm bound on the low rank matrices UU transpose and U star transpose. Right. So this technique of arguing about the incoherence of eigenvectors when you perturb a incoherent matrix with a sparse matrix was originally invented to study the eigenvectors of random matrices. And it's interesting that the same kind of approach can be used here in the context of robust PCA. So if we compare the runtime of this algorithm to convex solvers, right? So the blue one is the alternative minimization algorithm, and the red one is the convex solver. In the first plot, so in both the plots, the y-axis is the time. In the first plot, we are fixing the rank and incoherence and varying the number of corruptions. And in the second part, we are fixing rank and number of corruptions and varying the incoherence parameter. Right. In both cases, we see that the runtime of the alternative projection algorithm is much better compared to the convex solvers. Right. Yeah. So okay. So any questions till this point about like the proof or? Okay. So just check. I'm also audible and I've not lost connection.
Yeah, you are audible. You are audible.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you analytically prove that this alternate minimization will always beat the convex optimization methods? Like you are showing some empirical results.
Yeah. So what you can usually show is upper bounds. So the runtime guarantee we can show is this. So this is an upper bound on the runtime for alternating minimization, and for convex program, this is the best known runtime. I don't know of a lower bound that it will take at least this time, but this is the best known upper bound.
Okay.
Yeah. And in that sense, this is better than this, but this is not a lower bound. This is the best known upper bound.
Okay.
Okay, so let me show you like the empirical results of the convex method compared to this alternative minimization approach. So this is a video, and you want to decompose this into a background and then a foreground, right? So this is the output of the convex method, and this is the output of the alternative minimization algorithm, right? For both of them, like this is just the original video. This is exactly the same. This is the background for convex, foreground given by the convex method. This background given by the alternative minimization, and this is the foreground given by the alternative minimization algorithm. And as you can see, like the runtime of this alternative minimization algorithm is like much better compared to the convex method. So let me show you the video. So as people keep coming in, like the background does not really change much, and people essentially appear only in this foreground part, right? So in terms of like the output quality, this seems like very good, and the convex method seems to have at least some shadows from the foreground in this part, but alternative minimization seems much more robust. Yeah, and is much faster. So that's all I wanted to say about the robust PCA part. Can I just check how much longer I have?
Yeah, maybe you can take another 10 minutes.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I should be done. So let me now talk about like the third and final part, which is about sparse coding. So the sparse coding problem is as follows. So you are given a matrix Y. So here each column again corresponds to an example, let's say an image, right? And you want to decompose this as a product A star times X star, where each column of X star is sparse. What this means is that each column here can be represented as a linear combination of very few columns in this matrix. And in general, this is called a dictionary, and these are called the coefficient. This is called the coefficient matrix, right? So there are several applications for this decomposition, including like image compression, denoising in painting, and so on. Mostly in image processing. For example, in the image reconstruction problem, you may be given an image with only like 50% pixels, right? And you want to reconstruct the entire image based only on the 50% of the pixels that have been given to you. So these two are more standard kind of classical ways to reconstruct a given image. So what you do is you take the discrete cosine transform of the image, right? And it's been a it's well known that natural images have sparse representation in the discrete cosine transformation, discrete cosine transform, right? So, however, because there are missing pixels, this will be kind of spread all over the place in the discrete cosine transform. So you throw away all the high frequency components and only keep the low frequency components, and then you project it back onto the image space. This is the kind of image you get. Okay, and DCT is the basis of the JPEG format. So JPEG basically, given any image, it takes a discrete cosine transform, keeps only the low frequency component, so it compresses the image and throws away the higher components, right? This still is not very great because you can see some artifacts here, and this is a similar approach where the reconstruction is done using Haar wavelets, and even here you can again see some like patches, right? Whereas what this one does is you take a bunch of facial images, right? And so each column here corresponds to a facial image, right? And then you learn a dictionary which works well for facial images. And then you think of this as a new image, right? You take this column and then you want to find a sparse basis for this image in this basis, right? And then that will be your reconstruction. So you can see that like this is much better in terms of the visual quality compared to these other methods. So right. So the sparse coding, or this is also known as the dictionary learning problem, is widely used for these tasks of image compression, denoising, and inpainting, especially in image processing literature, right? So the algorithm for solving this problem, again, like the alternative minimization approach, is the following. So you have the given matrix Y and you have AX, and you want to minimize the Frobenius square of Y minus AX, subject to the condition that X is sparse. So you choose an initial A0 using a particular clustering algorithm, which I'll not get into the details of, but this is also a slightly non-trivial algorithm. And then in iteration, in every iteration t equal to 1 to 1 and 1 to so on, you first estimate, so you fix A, right? And then you estimate coefficients xt. And this is just a sparse recovery or compressed sensing problem, right? So firstly, this decouples into different problems for each column. So for the first column, you have this y1, and then you have this at minus 1, and you want to find an x1 which is sparse and minimizes this error, right? Then you do this for like all the different samples. So these are all compressed sensing problems. And once you have these coefficient matrices, you update the dictionary matrix, and this is again just least squares problem over this matrix A, right? So both of these can be done efficiently. And the result is that under some non-degeneracy conditions, in particular incoherent dictionary and bounds on sparsity, this can actually recover the underlying decomposition. Okay. There are many more results for slightly simpler versions of the algorithms in the papers by like Arora, Gay, Mann, Moitra, and also in the noisy setting, also with non-generative assumptions. So this is under a statistical setting where the data is coming from a statistical model. So A could be arbitrary, but once A is fixed, the data matrix is being generated based on some statistical assumptions on X. But there are also results which only assume some non-degeneracy conditions and no particular generative model for the data. Okay. So to conclude, I hope I was able to convince you that matrix decomposition is an extremely valuable tool for extracting information from data. However, the kind of decomposition is not always clear, and one needs to have good intuition about like the structure of the problem and maybe like the domain from which the data is coming from to be able to find the right structure. And once we are able to establish what a good structure on the matrix decomposition could be, in many of these cases, alternating minimization is usually applicable, and in most of these settings, it has been a very successful meta-algorithm. And there has also been a lot of theoretical insights into the behavior of alternating minimization now, and hopefully this can help us develop like even more efficient algorithms also for other settings going forward. Yeah, so that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Pranik, for the interesting talk. Yeah, audience, if you have any question, you can ask now.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So maybe you already gave an answer in your talk, but yeah, I'm asking it anyway. So where exactly this alternative minimization algorithm, where exactly it beat the convex relaxation of the problem?
Sorry, can you phrase the question? So where exactly does it beat? Or
I mean, can you give some insights on like in what properties were exploited where the alternating minimization was?
or let me say why convex relaxation, what convex relaxation does not exploit, which alternative minimization. So convex relaxation, so for example, in all these matrix decomposition problems, right, the like at least for the first two problems, for the third problem, actually, I don't know of a convex relaxation approach. At least for the first two problems, you're actually trying to recover a smaller number of parameters. So even though the matrix can be of size n times m, right?
Yeah.
The total number of parameters, for example, in the low rank setting, you are trying to recover only r times n plus r times m, right? That's the total number of parameters you want to recover.
Yeah.
Right? So alternating minimization actually works in this low dimensional space with only these parameters. But convex relaxation works in the entire matrix space, which is of dimension n times m. Okay? So that's the main reason for why these approaches are much more scalable compared to the convex relaxation approaches.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Hello.
Yes, Pranik. Yeah. I'm waiting for someone else wants to ask any.
No, there are various techniques for image processing because, for instance, some people do it with hypergraphs, say the French school, for example. So, I mean, how do you compare unless you have some common parameters? Which one is better? How do you decide? I mean,
so I'm not from the image processing community per se, so I'm not sure like which particular problem you are referring to where people are using hypergraphs. But at least for these image compression denoising, this dictionary learning has been a widely used tool. So there may definitely be other problems where hypergraph or like there may be other approaches, but at least I'm not familiar with those things being used in this context, like image compression or denoising.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So I have a question. So while comparing two methods, let's say in this with alternative minimization and convex relaxation.
Yeah.
So our main concern was just to compare the runtimes, right? Not anything else.
Correct. So in terms of like theoretical results, in terms of like sample complexity, both of them
Yeah.
are comparable. Both of them pretty much get the same kind of statistical guarantees. So in terms of theory, I think all we are comparing here is that these are much more efficient, right?
Okay.
Okay. Okay. If
Yeah.
there,
And one more thing.
yes. Yes, Navish, proceed.
Yeah. So, yeah. Thank you. So, in all these algorithms, we are not actually focusing on exploiting the geometry of the space in which we're dealing with. So, let's say we are choosing only Frobenius norm kind of thing. How about we choose some different norms like which can generalize norms, for example, Brakman divergence, and at the same time exploit geometry of the space. So, do you think that those kind of approaches can help improve or can help generalize the algorithms to a much farther extent than we have now, right now?
So the other thing is like this is not just about optimization. You also have these non-degeneracy conditions and statistical model for at least like like two of these problems, right?
Yeah.
So even if you use a different objective, like minimizing like the operator norm square instead of Frobenius norm square, it's not clear how that will affect maybe how that will interact with like the modeling assumptions that we have made on the data generating process. Like presumably it may still be okay. For example, for SVD, when you look at the full matrix, right? Okay, so maybe like that's a good place to start. So if you are minimizing Frobenius square and then you are doing alternating minimization, right?
Yeah.
There are two things. So one is the update can be written in closed form and it's indeed exactly the power method, right? But if you are minimizing like the operator norm square, you will still again converge to the top eigenvector, but the algorithm now is very different. And even classically, I don't know if it's implemented. So it's definitely interesting.
Although we do not really know where we are heading. It's sort of that thing. Okay.
Yeah. So even in the classical setting, I'm saying these things have not been very well explored, perhaps. Yeah. But it's definitely an interesting question. So maybe worthwhile understanding that. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Thanks for a great talk. Thank you so much.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, if there is no other question, let's thank Pranit for his interesting talk. Yeah, thank you so much, Pranit.
Yeah, thank you, Rajesh.
Yeah.